Then I'd like to welcome you to our side event on pathways to prosperity and climate neutrality. This is the huge contradiction within the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030. And the side event is based on a report that Global Energy Solutions and the Research Institute for Applied Knowledge Processing, amongst others with industry partners and experts, have been working on during the last 2 years. And the question was really, what can be done for prosperity and climate neutrality on the way to 2050? Because probably what most of you, when you're on stage or anywhere in an interview with press or something, have been asked before is there a chance, right? Do you still have hope? Because we have problems, we have financing problems, we have technology issues, international cooperation is not straightforward, so the question is there hope? And that was the fundamental question when we started our work on that report, thinking about a way up to 2050 that is technically practical, possible, economically viable, and also possible to be rolled out on a global scale. Of course, international cooperation is key. So for this session, we are going to have a presentation on that report by Christof von Branconi. It's going to be about 15 minutes. After that, we're going to bring up a panel of experts that are going to reflect on the presentation. And this is Irene Cañas-Diaz, Nora Magero, Semida Silveira, and in the end, we're going to have a wrap-up, a conclusion by Franz Josef Rademacher. By the way, these are all 4 experts from the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition. This is a council that was founded in November last year to support the Secretariat of the United Nations Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, with regard to energy transition, and engineers and experts in that field are going to have been working already on issues that are then going to be fed in the process, especially also for COP this year. So I'm welcoming Christof von Branconi, the head of Global Energy Solutions, and would like to ask the technicians to put on his presentation. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Tobias, for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, as you learned in this remarkable conference, there are 1,001 aspects to get to net zero. Under the guidance of Professor Rademacher, we have been so courageous to just focus on the key questions. In order to have a reference solution at all, that was the question whether it was possible, so we have one, but we feel that it will be 2050 before the world has reached, it will be 2070 before the world has reached net zero and not 2050. And the solution that has been developed by the team allows prosperity for everyone, also for low and middle income countries like in Africa. Let me give you the insight. What was the approach? We divided the world in 3 groups. The rich OECD world, the so-called China Club, China, Russia, and the oil-rich countries of the Middle East, and what we call the Challenge Group, 128 mid- and low-income countries. Each of those 3 groups are today contributing about roughly 1/3 to global emissions. You see on the chart that the population and GDP numbers today and in 2050. Population growth only takes place in the Challenge Group. And the Challenge Group is the one that is entitled to grow without prioritizing climate issues. In our model, their GDP quadruples, basically meaning in our forecast, we think it's possible that by 2050, it is 4 times what it is today. And that, of course, will significantly help those countries to achieve their social development goals. Now, in terms of climate net zero achievement, the OECD group has the means and the commitment to be climate neutral by 2050. With regard to the China Club, China has said it will attain net zero in 2060. And so the question is, there will be the point is there's no solution for net zero for the globe overall if there's not a solution for reaching net zero for the challenge group. So the real question becomes, how can the challenge group countries achieve net zero by the middle of the century? And what are the elements for that solution? From our point of view, there are 6 elements to consider. The first element is what we call power generation on 2 pillars. What is it? It deals with the issue that the higher the share of wind and solar energy becomes, the higher the effect and cost of volatility. Of course, always a little bit dependent on the geographic specificities, but in general, the higher the share of wind and solar energy, the larger the aspect of volatility of those deliveries become. So the conclusion was that in order to deal with the dark lulls, reliably controllable energy sources are also needed. And we are of the view that probably about 40 to 60% share for the so-called new renewables is what makes sense, and that the second reliably controllable energy source for countries should either be fossil energies with carbon capture in order to eliminate harmful emissions, or possibly nuclear energy in those countries which have the means and kind of the capabilities to apply nuclear energy. That leads to the second element of the solution. And the second element is what we call the joker. It is the carbon capture, utilization and storage technologies, which basically aim at capturing the CO2 from point sources where CO2 is emitted, and then either store the CO2 underground safely or make use, for example, in chemical products or possibly in e-fuels. Why is carbon capture, usage and storage, why is it the joker? It is because today the energy supply of the world is to 80% dependent on fossil fuels, and the business models of major countries like the US, like China, like Russia, are all heavily dependent on the usage of fossil fuels. And a cheap energy source is also fundamental to enable economic growth. So from our conviction, a lot speaks for very consistently applying carbon capture technologies, and one may also look to other people who dealt with the net zero challenge, like the International Energy Agency or IRENA. All consider carbon capture technologies as the major area where growth in application needs to happen in order to at all have a chance to get to net zero. Well, the third element of our solution are the climate neutral fuels and energy carriers. Climate neutral fuels and energy carriers are key for mobility. And mobility is a key element of perceived prosperity and freedom. So today there are 1.2 billion combustion engines in operation on the globe, and the number of combustion engines is still growing, larger than electric vehicles are growing. We have airplanes, cargo ships, all operated on fossil fuels. So the real challenge is that climate neutral fuels and energy carriers need to be developed as much as possible in order to allow operating most of those fleets on an ongoing basis. The solution must come either from e-fuels, which are basically fuels that are based on green energy, or from bioenergy-based fuels, with, of course, also a significant role for electric vehicles, but the challenge is so big that it will not be possible to achieve climate neutrality without a major contribution from climate neutral fuels and energy carriers. The fourth element is then linked to methane. That simply comes into play because methane is a very intense climate gas, and while it is on the one hand very dispersed, there are certain cases where it can be relatively easily minimized, the emissions. One are linked to the whole usage and value chain of liquefied natural gas. So if you eliminate emissions along these chains, then there's a big advantage regarding minimization of climate impact. And the other are kind of flare gases. When flare gases from the exploration of natural gases are emitted, then of course it is possible to kind of reduce the negative impact on the climate. And it is a relatively cheap way to improve the climate situation, as the methane itself has such a dramatic negative impact, so elimination gives us kind of a very positive effect. Now, after these technological focused elements, we have to talk about nature. Nature helps us. Those are the nature-based solutions. Nature buffers a quarter of emissions today, order of magnitude of 14 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And that basically means we should strengthen nature to the maximum extent possible. And strengthening nature goes into two directions. One direction is protecting what is available. So protecting means maintaining rainforest and boreal forests and do whatever possible to kind of allow people to not cut them. And the second element is strengthening the further areas of nature that contribute positively to their positive climate effect. And those are primarily afforestation programs, and secondly, soil improvement activities, so that the CO2 capturing capability of soils are strengthened. The other big advantage of the strengthening of the nature-based solution program is that they are very important for job creation in kind of the low and middle income countries. And furthermore, of course, I mean, if nature is kind of supported, then we also get positive effects on the nutritional necessities. So, for the question of how can this program be financed, I want to deal with that in more detail. And the understanding is that the global north has to realize that it cannot attain net zero independently, and that there is a lot that the global south has to offer. And we used for that the term of system services. So basically, if, for example, rainforests are protected, or if afforestation programs are implemented, we consider this to be a system service that needs to be financed from, in our case, from the rich OECD countries. And basically, there are three major areas that we think needs to be supported from the global north. The first area is the area of the unconditional NDCs. Most countries have by now issued their nationally determined contribution programs, but most of them, or many of them, with a condition or so-called conditional program, which basically means that this program will only be followed if significant funds are made available. And the challenge here is that, of course, those programs at the end of the day need to get, if I may use the term, a quality of bankability. I mean, they must be so trustworthy and reliable that money can be put on the table to implement them. And therefore, we consider it necessary that significant funds are made available in order to review those programs and kind of structure them in a way that they really can become the basis of a contractual agreement. And when that is achieved, then it is possible to also introduce a cap and trade system so that the countries amongst each other can kind of look for the kind of most efficient and economically best approach to implementing programs, which becomes easier if the programs themselves are highly reliable. And we consider that a global cap and trade system is one of the fundamental necessities in order to enable kind of an efficient way for the globe to achieve net zero. So that's the first part of the governance and finance sector of our program. The second part then is following the idea from the Montreal Protocol. In the Montreal Protocol, there was differential costs paid from the northern or from the OECD type countries in order to enable kind of less developed countries to apply the most efficient technologies. And the same must be done in the context of climate investments. For example, if a power plant is invested somewhere in a country in Africa, the additional carbon capture technology and the higher cost of that additional piece of equipment should be borne from the OECD countries, as we have characterized it in a Montreal Protocol type of arrangement. And the same holds true for the necessary energy infrastructure investments. Also, the energy infrastructure investment need significant support from the OECD type countries. The third major area where support is needed is now the nature-based solution programs. This is the maintaining of the rainforest, boreal forest, this is the afforestation, this is the soil improvement programs, because again, significant amounts of money are necessary. The benefit comes from employment, the benefits comes from also nutritional contributions. And our estimate was that this overall program would end up to some $1.2 trillion per year, which is pretty much an $800 per OECD citizen per year contribution, pretty much 12 times of what is kind of looked for today. And the motivation behind spending that money also lies in a possible global economic miracle that would be triggered from these investments. Let's briefly look to the visualization. So what you see here is on the left-hand axis the 53 billion tons of CO2 emissions today. What we visualize here is that how these can be reduced to 2050 and 2070. We are pretty certain that by 2050 we will not be at zero, but at 2050 we will probably be at least at 5 billion tons. 5 billion tons, yes, for example, due to the China situation that are only committed to 2060. And for example, India is committed to 2070. So we expect that also in case our programs are applied, at 2060 there will be at least 3 billion tons left. Under the blue line, the first areas A, D, and G, that is the ongoing contribution from nature, the reduction of 14 billion tons a year. Then you see a red line in the middle. This is what we would consider the business as usual curve. And finally, if our programs are implemented in the best case, the orange line that goes from 39 up to 0 in 2070 is what could be achieved. What are the takeaways? The reference solution shows that net zero is possible. There may be better solution, but without cooperation, there may be no solution at all. Reaching global net zero will be decided in the low and middle income countries, the challenge group. Technology and nature will have to play together, so there are key areas that need to be focused on the technology side, and at the same time a lot of focus needs to go on nature, and hopefully innovation helps us on the way. Unfortunately, a yearly contribution of $800 per OECD citizen appears to be the minimum cost solution. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christof. If you hand over the microphone, then you can directly sit on the right-hand side on the stage, because people already know you. And then I would like to ask our panelists to come on stage. Irene Cañas-Diaz over here, Nora Magero, probably in the middle, and Semida Silveira on that side. And you could then also put the slide with all the names and pictures on. Yeah, thank you very much. This was a very rich presentation, I'd like to say. The report is also rich, and you did a good job in summarizing the main takeaways within 15 minutes. Thank you very much for that. And now we're very excited about your statements, your comments, your thoughts on that proposed solution. And you have broad history in working with sustainability, in climate. Internationally, you've been a vice minister of Costa Rica for environment and energy. This is exactly the linkage we are trying to highlight here, not only energy or environment, but how it can play together. Nora has rich experience in practical applications. You founded a startup in Kenya, Drop Access, that provides energy systems to the rural community, especially in a refrigerator. We heard about that in other panels yesterday and maybe also today. Semida Silveira, I think you've been at the conferences of the parties with regard to climate from the very first one in Berlin. I think later Chancellor Merkel was the environmental minister chairing that. So we are very interested about your comments on the reference solution. And maybe I'd like to ask Irene to start and go on.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to this panel. I think the report was really interesting. For me, it was like, I believe it has a different approach to the problem, to the challenge that we have for climate change. And when I was reading the report, the first thing that I did was think about my country, Costa Rica. That is a small country, and you know, I don't know if you know that we are part of the OECD, but we are a very small and not a rich country. Definitely, we are not a rich country, but we are in that select group of countries. And the other thing is that Costa Rica is a very rare case, because we've been generating with renewable sources for so many years, and on the last, I think, 8 to 10 years, we've been able to generate more than 98% of our electricity with renewable sources, just 2% with fossil fuels. And that 2% is one of the things that the report says. It is needed for backup when we don't have enough wind during the dry season, and when we don't have enough water also during the dry season, because we have reservoirs that we storage water from the rainy season to the dry season. So for me, it was interesting to read the report, but also think about Costa Rica, because we've been managed to generate almost 100% renewable sources. And well, we don't have the solution yet for those 2%, because batteries is also a very expensive solution right now, and as the report says, it gives us just hours, not days of electricity, or weeks in the case when we have a very dry summer. So I was thinking, well, there's not a unique recipe for the solutions. So we need to look at each country or each region. And it took us a lot of years to get there. So when I think about climate change and what do we need to do, well, I naturally think that it is possible, because I live in a country when it has been possible. But we still need to work very hard, and we don't have time. So what it took to Costa Rica 70 years to get there, we need to move faster, and we need to have an open mind for other solutions. And related with nature-based solutions, there's other thing that Costa Rica has been working very hard. Since the 90s, we have a law that created a fund so we can finance afforestation and to protect rainforest and to invest in more cover of forest in Costa Rica. Right now, we have like 70% of our land covered by forest. So I think we've been working really hard to get the country that we have. So in my case, I think it is possible. And when I read the report, I believe that there are still so much to do in other countries. And certainly my doubts are on the carbon capture and storage. I have so many questions on that, because I think that the challenge that we all face in the whole world is the feasibility to develop the infrastructure. Generation, transmission, carbon capture storage. Every time it's more difficult to get the feasibility, not the technical, the social and environmental feasibilities to develop the infrastructure. So I think the challenge is there. Because the technology, we have the technology. But if we are going to think about carbon capture and storage as part of the solution, where, how much, the normative, who is going to regulate that, and the feasibility to get that infrastructure. So I think that we still need to work a lot, but I believe that we don't have to forget about the feasibility of developing the infrastructure, because every time it's harder and harder to get the permits to develop any infrastructure. And also the other thing, and I won't talk more, we know that for this renewable transition, we need a lot of materials and a lot of minerals. And every time it's harder to get the permits to mining. So again, we need to think about the feasibility of developing the infrastructure for everything. Mining, transmission, generation, carbon storage. So that will be my comment. Thank you, Tobias.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was a very thank you very much. A very interesting statement, and if I highlight something, it's importance of infrastructure for the realization, from getting the technical solutions into practice on large scale. Time is a factor, right? Because you said 70 years it took Costa Rica to develop that infrastructure and the feasibility and implementation practices, and we don't probably have 70 years yet, right? And the other thing is that we need to break down that global model that has been presented for being applied for individual countries, regional solutions, probably also national solutions, because every country, of course, is different. That will be probably a next step. You always have work to do, as you said, but of course, this gives inspiration for how to break that down and how every country fits into that solution. Thank you very much for this. Nora, we are excited about your view, because Christof very much highlighted the importance of the so-called challenge group, and let me emphasize, challenge here is really about realizing prosperity and climate neutrality at the same time, right? Depending on how you pronounce it, how you use the word challenge, can be negative, positive. We see that as really affirmative. This is where the core problem is, because so often global south countries have been exploited for the benefits of the others, and this is what is certainly not feasible for the future. So what are your comments about the report?
Oh my goodness. So I come from Kenya, and Kenya we have pretty much 90% renewable energy being injected into the grid, and I know we have the potential, and we're driving to have 100% renewable energy being injected into the grid. And I've spent so many of my career years, very little compared to the panel, promoting renewable energy adoption, for it to be largely take part in the transition. But really, as an engineer and from a scientific perspective, I always knew at the back of my head that we're going to need much more help to achieve net zero beyond just renewable energy. Mostly because I have such big issues with critical minerals leaving the continent in order to serve the renewable energy industries. And I could literally spend the whole day talking about it and what I think should be done right now. So that is why I really do agree that renewable energy won't really be the solution to take us fully to net zero as a continent. But now, when I read through the report and just the contributions that we really need to make, first of all, just even before I continue, thank you so much for clarifying the challenged countries, because I was quite taken back when I started reading the report, and I just needed to understand a bit much more, because I really do come from the challenged countries. I'm from the global south, obviously. So if we look at it from a point of prosperity and as we push for us to get to net zero, then truly it is a challenge for the world to take part in. So looking at the 6 pillars of how we can actually do get to net zero, and given my background working in renewable energy, but also my background as an engineer, I truly do agree that renewable energy alone is not sufficient. And also we need to look at the reliably controllable sources. But then I am just tempted not to truly agree that fossil fuel should still participate into this. And I won't even go around and say maybe, no, not really, because the more we have fossil fuels being put into the market, there's going to be a greater need to have a carbon sink for that. And it goes back to where, how, and how can we track this and really just ascertain that we can protect all these things, or rather the capture technologies, without really creating a greater crisis. I still need to see much more scientific perspective of the possibility of this, testing done to ascertain that this is safe for the environment and also safe economically. And there has been talk about Kenya being a possible carbon sink because of the Rift Valley rock structure and where the geothermal mining is happening. And I know there's an Norwegian organization that is going to do a pilot. And that obviously makes me question this Kenya being the possibility of one of the countries that actually carbon capture technologies and strategies are being implemented, makes me go back to why this country and what are the safety parameters that have been implemented and tested, to the point where even with the growing population, we're now going to take so much land within the Rift Valley to ensure that we get to capture all this carbon to the benefit of the countries that are emitting it, and they're implementing these technologies within the Kenyan landscape, and the dollar just goes back to them. So I have so many questions when it comes to carbon capture from a scientific perspective, but then also just from a social perspective. And I'm thinking, this report is such a hopeful perspective of what we really need to do, but my question is, must we really implement all the 6 pillars? Can we just try to work through better ways of implementing renewable energy technologies? It's obviously not foolproof. And limit carbon emissions as much as possible, implementing better technologies, reducing methane leakages and all that, but then also reducing their use as much as possible, instead of just ramping up as much as control as it can be. So I deep down believe that human beings cannot be trusted, truly, with the future of the continent. We are prone to chaos. And if we just open that pathway to say, oh yeah, let's go ahead and still explore the fossil fuels, there is a possibility that as much as the organization is going to set all the strategies on how to ensure that this is done, there's going to be leakages. Something is going to break. Somebody is going to become errant. And we've seen it, people just becoming non-compliant, really. And I really don't fully trust that, or rather, I don't really feel that the burden should be put on the challenged countries to be the sole determinant on how we are going to transit to net zero through the strategies stated out. Must we implement all of them 6? I agree with, I really personally do not mind nuclear energy as a solution, so long as I can be sure that if we install a nuclear plant in Kenya, it's going to be safe, and we've learned sufficiently from the disasters that have happened in the past, and the technology has been improved. I want to read that. I want to experience that, just to be so sure that we can go into nuclear without really focusing on going fossil fuel. I completely agree with nature-based solutions, mostly with soil protection and reforestation, but then it must be done appropriately. Right now, Kenya is really, really, really pushing. We have 4% forest cover as a country. That is just dismal, really. And we're really trying to push so that we get to 10% and even beyond 10%. And I see the country really focusing on reforestation measures. But then there's the big issue of the survival of all these measures that we're going to put into them. And it comes back to the soil, what can I say, the quality of the soil, the amount of water, and also just the strategies that have been put there to ensure that these forests actually do survive. So nature-based solution also must be done right. And also countries like Kenya should be given sufficient support to just ensure survival, and also better strategies being put to implement this nature-based solution, mostly stemming from capacity building being appropriately done to ensure that we do take nature-based solutions seriously within the African ecosystem. And I know there is enough, or rather there is sufficient space within the continent to, or even, what can I say, we have opportunities within the continent to implement nature-based solution. So I would rather scale down the second strategy, implementing fossil-based and looking more of how to ramp up nature-based solution as a way of just ensuring whatever carbon that is still being emitted, because obviously we can't reduce it completely, it can be injected into the nature-based solution, but not put up carbon capture technologies to be able to take up what's already being emitted from the fossil fuel.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I think one thought that directly came into my mind is that when we were working on the report, the baseline was that we want to have that 6% on average of economic growth in the Global South countries, and for the least developed countries, the 7% on average per year. This is what the Sustainable Development Goals set as a goal, as a target, right? And then we thought, okay, which contribution or which option we have can contribute to achieving this prosperity goal in combination with the climate neutrality goal, right? And then we had the nature-based solutions. We looked what are the bottlenecks, what is the potential. We had the renewable energies, what are the bottlenecks. We had the hydrogen, what are the bottlenecks to scale up batteries, synthetic fuels. And at some point, all of those building blocks reached a certain bottleneck or limitation on the path to 2050. And we kept on adding building blocks to achieving that target, right? And so our report is more about not either or, but you need to do your best job in all of the areas to be able to really reach that goal, right? And this is probably one strength, because oftentimes a lot of discussions are on either battery electric vehicles or synthetic fuels, either renewables or control reliable sources, but we won't get to the goal if we do not employ all of them in a reliable way, in a possible, and this is what science and politics probably has to work on very strongly, right? Semida, you said you enjoyed being the last in the group, but we have another 15-20 minutes to go afterwards, so looking forward to your thoughts.
No, it was good because, as Rahma says, being the last, a lot has already been said, interesting comments have been made. But I'd like to start complimenting you for, the courage. I think Christopher said we were very courageous, and I agree. I think it's courageous to start an exercise like that. I know how difficult it is. You have a group, and then just creating the boundary of the study is a challenge of its own. And then doesn't matter, you take a big breath and try to encompass a lot. There are still things that you have to leave out to make it work, and but you want to have a system boundary that will make sense and bring insights. I also liked the name of the exercise, Pathways to Prosperity and Climate Neutrality, the aspect of really recognizing that we still need to continue building prosperity in other parts of the world. So I think it's very important. But also when you take a big breath like that, you also open many fronts where people can say, oh, but you didn't consider this, you didn't consider that, and then also a lot of fronts for criticism. And so I think I see the report very much, I mean the exercise and the results very much as a very nice way of kind of saying what do we see is possible. This is one scenario. Now you chose to work with one scenario of prosperity. You could have thought of a different scenario. I think one different scenario for me, I think this is a great opportunity to rethink the way we build prosperity. And this is not there at all. So the way we have built prosperity, really extremely resource intensive way of life. You know, I was thinking the way you introduced that I've been in this business of climate since COP1 and before, actually, thinking that how we, in the beginning, the countries were saying, oh, let's put the South to do things in the South, let's do collaboration so that we mitigate in the South. And the accusation that, okay, the rich countries don't want to do anything, in fact. They don't want to change anything. Actually, in the Bush administration, he says the American lifestyle is not in negotiation. And then really, when I look at you know, whenever I'm traveling in the US and wherever I look to the side, there are 6 lanes, and there are another 6 lanes, so 12 lanes of cars, and we want to solve the problem of transport emissions with electrification. And I don't see yet a serious discussion about sustainable mobility. So we are not thinking of rethinking the prosperity proposition. So this, for me, it reminds me also of the Brundtland report, when, you know, the Brundtland report was the first, let's say at the global level, the first milestone when it comes to sustainability. And, but if you read it really carefully, you will see that basically says, let's continue doing what we do, but a little bit better. That's what the Brundtland report actually does. Said we have to improve the proposition, but it's seen in perspective, was marginal. What is important, because it really kind of created a discussion at the global level, a serious discussion. So I think that your report can also create a big discussion, but really I promise you, the fossil fuel industry will love it. Because the most important, the largest investments that are being made in the US today are in CCS. And despite all the other things that are being said, it's CCS. And this is to save the fossil fuel industry. I think we have an historical opportunity to rethink the way we build prosperity. And if we just work on the end of the pipe, because for me, CCS is end of the pipe. We are not building circularity. So if we continue doing this, you know, like in the 70s, it was like the chimney. So you put a filter, but you continue the process the same way. And then and this and that. So we want to go for renewables, but we want to go mining, we want to go in large scale in the same model. So unless we think circularity so that the materials get used in a different way, for the technical materials, we have to create circularity mimicking the nature, And for the bioeconomy, of course, it's quite easy to copy what nature does. So I think I would have liked if you kind of challenged. You didn't challenge, because then you navigate the status quo in a way. The way we build prosperity and the fossil fuel industry. But I do like, for example, that you challenge the possibility of building renewables and doing electrification to the extent that is being proposed. I think that is good, that we challenge. I'm also skeptical about that, for various reasons, including the reasons that have been raised here also by my colleagues on the issue of social acceptance to operate and etc. And about, I know in the rhetoric, African countries often says, well, let us not stop us from using fossil fuels because we need to grow. But at the same time, we're cementing the same model, the same type of energy structure. But we do see that in places where they challenge that, and I can tell you that even in the US today, one of the big problems for expansion of renewables is acceptance by the communities. And then there are, various cases where the community have stopped, or they have to change the project, or they have to halve the project, etc. So the communities need to see ways of getting more out of it. So to finalize, I've been long here, but there is one more point I wanted to do, because you propose prosperity on 6-7% growth for the challenge group for the developing countries. And then we will mobilize a lot of resources for the CCS. So let us play with the idea that we will manage to have that transfer of cost, because we have seen how difficult it is to get the transfer of resources. But let's say we do. So we mobilize all those resources, and then let's also play with the thought that there will be enough sites and there will be enough acceptance to use those sites. Still, when those investments come, they will not generate jobs. So I wonder where the 6-7% will come from, because the CCS will not generate jobs. They will, so it's challenging in many ways. I don't know, I think you don't go around a deep discussion on whether there will be enough sites and enough social acceptance, but for the developing countries, these are, again, it would be an investment that would come, that we use the sites, that will pay for the services, which is good, but it will not generate jobs. So the 6-7%, I don't know. And then we will be mobilizing a lot of resources at the international level for that purpose.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm just going to get my clock. And Semida, you touched upon a very important point, right? You talked about financing the whole program, and you talked about the fossil fuel industry that might be very interested in that report, but maybe not involving the industry to a necessary extent is also the reason why we do not gather enough funding globally for a transition, right? And if you look into where the capital is globally, it is 5 to 7 times higher in the private sector than on the state level, but everybody's always looking onto the state level and to do the job without looking into what industry can contribute. And Christof, you have experience in the private sector working with plant facilities. What do you think, what would be the reaction of industry when they look into our program, and what are the challenges, to not let them take over and define their path, so that is whatever bad has happened will continue forever, right? But how can we get them involved without giving away, so to say, the lead to achieve our goals?
Well, Tobias, thank you. And thank you for the 3 very interesting contributions, which generate at least some intention on my side to give a few comments, which I think are important. First of all, we did not end up with the solution we originally wanted. So when we started out, we hoped that we could capture the solar energy in the solar belt of the globe and just get the energy to where it is needed. And we very soon found out that that is a dream that within the time span that is given will not be possible, simply due to a lot of limitations in terms of generating enough hydrogen from electrolysis and getting the hydrogen to the places where the energy is needed. So the original dream solution we had to scrap. Secondly, when we look to the various options available, there was one option which is the absolute best one in terms of resource usage, in the sense of making the least use of minerals and so on and so forth, which is nuclear energy. Again, a solution which we adapted more than we originally wanted, but still we see significant limitations in putting all hopes on that energy source. Yeah? And if I now work further down the line with those two limitations given to us, then I'm suddenly seeing that 80% of energy used today is fossil nature. There are a lot of countries that are having their business model based on the usage of them. So what possibly can be done to apply this in a way that it kind of can be acceptable? And that is something where I learned from you, and I'm not surprised that carbon capture is lacking acceptability today. Yeah, it is applied on a certain scale. I mean, there are 40 million tons captured these days, and they are used mostly to retrieve gas or oil. But we certainly see that from the technological point of view of the capture, it is mature in certain applications, not in all applications. But a lot needs to be done to kind of get to the acceptance level. And just you interestingly addressed this aspect of prosperity, which was kind of taken as a natural given in our program. And I think there are two sides to that coin. The ones that don't yet have the prosperity, I mean, they don't want to go for the discussion of not getting there. It is probably more the side that already has the prosperity that starts discussing, do I really need it? But from what we observe in reality, I mean, there is politically, it is very, very difficult to give up on something that you think you have, although there may be erosion. I mean, Europe is in a perfect path to erosion of prosperity, and let's not fool ourselves on this. But as a general guideline for the program, I accept the attention you are giving, that we not question it. So that's from my end. And now, I mean, regarding the industry, and I think job creation has very significantly been linked to the nature-based solutions programs. If that is not used for job creation, I'm with you, it will not come from the technical solution side.
And also what Nora said is that having bigger parts of the whole value chain in, for example, any technology that you have, that African countries are not only there for the minerals and the resources to be extracted and then processed and sold again to Africa from other parts of the world. This was also something already raised, for example, by Zimbabwe on the last COP, that everyone is basically chanting for keeping more of the value creation within the countries where the resource is also used and is extracted, right? Let me provide the floor to Franz Josef Rademacher on different angles. One is financing, right? Our report emphasizes that approximately tenfold the amount of money needs to be spent on realizing that project, the program, and also here the terminology challenge group can be used here, because it's also probably a huge challenge for the extended OECD countries to, really spend that funds, right? So from that perspective, the whole challenge group thing turns around, and the extended OECD then becomes the challenge group, right? To then be implementing together with Global South countries the prosperity models. And probably, Semida, if you want to touch upon that point, when you set the boundary conditions like pricing CO2, like not destroying nature, not exploiting the planet, so to say, right? Probably within that decades to 2050, prosperity models might change automatically because, for example, resource extraction, fossil fuel use, CO2 production is not as cheap as it is now, right? So probably materialistically, the way we live in 2050 from the prosperity point of view is also going to change as an inherent component of the whole program, right? To which extent, in which region, I cannot say right now, right? I don't have a glass skull. But Franz Josef Rademacher, please, your wrap up within the last 5 to 10 minutes. Please, come here. You wanted to stand, right? Yeah, then I can keep
So
sitting.
you can sit.
Thanks.
You are young enough to be allowed
Sit.
to sit, yeah. And I say hello to everybody, and I'm very grateful that we have this session, and I'm grateful that we have this wonderful panel, and I'm particularly grateful that Irene, Noah, and Semida took the time and the effort to look into the report and to give a kind of feedback, which is very important for us in going on with what we are working on. And our starting point was Indira Gandhi's speech, now 51 years ago, at that time in Copenhagen, when she said to the rich world, "We will go with you for nature, but only if we can follow concerning prosperity. And we are absolutely not willing to accept that we will not have prosperity only to protect the environment while you sit there on your high level, good situation, exploiting us. We will not accept that." And I took China as the example, and they had 10 to 12% growth for 2 decades. And the biggest achievement was to bring several hundred million of people out of poverty. This is a real big social contribution to sustainability. The price is that they now have so much CO2 as the OECD countries all together. So that was, of course, our main problem. How to have the prosperity and at the same time solve the climate problem and do Agenda 2030, even if it takes until 2050. Yeah? But however to achieve this, that was the main challenge we had to deal with. And I found it interesting. Semida, you said, where is the circularity? We have to go to circularity. Many people do not realize that the carbon capture way is circular carbon. So you have the carbon in the ground, you take it out as a gas, you burn it, you capture the CO2, you do the CO2 back into the same places where you took the gas, and the carbon goes back. So what you have is, you have a carbon circulation. It is circular economy if you do carbon capture. Now, people are afraid what might happen. For me, important is that the president of Norway, which for many people is a very important country for sustainability, he offered the Europeans to store all CO2 in Europe over this century in his caves, where he took the gas out. He wants to put the CO2 back in the same spaces where it had been for a million years. The Norway president offered it to the Europeans for 30 euros per ton of CO2, the storage. I mean, it's expensive. You have to capture it, you have to transport it, then you have to store it. And I think he gave a very important hint when he said, of course, our lifestyles in the north would massively have to change if we, on average, would have to pay this 800 euros per year for the transformation process, because it would make us considerably lose standard of living if not other forces would compensate for that.
800 euros per person in the OECD
Yes.
for 1.5 billion, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes,
That
this is
the
so it would mean the lifestyles of 1.5 billion people would considerably change if they had to give $800 a year to global development. And that is not in their purse afterwards. That money is in global development. And that pays all the things needed. And you said, well, where are the jobs? Yeah, it's clear where the jobs are. We want that Africa doubles population. They will build the biggest cities in the world. They will build all those skyscrapers. They need the steel. They need the concrete. And it should be produced in Africa and not come from China. And by producing all that what is needed to have a population doubling in urbanization and increasing prosperity, that creates the jobs. But this process has to be co-financed, and therefore the rich countries, they have to transfer that money. And that is exactly what they not want. So in every debate I follow since 20 years is, we have a financial problem. We do not have the resources. Where do we get the finance? Today there is in the Austrian journal, they say, the money for climate adaptation in the, what we call the challenge countries, we need 20 times as much money for adaptation. We have the money for the adaptation. We don't do what we should do because these rich countries, they are so unwilling to spend money somewhere else. They always want to spend their money at home so that it goes into their purse when they have jobs. What they not want is that the money goes to Africa. Africa imports 90% of processed food for Africa is imported. We want that it is produced in Africa and nowhere else, and that they export. But therefore, they need the money to create that process, and that is a crucial thing. And I personally believe the biggest obstacle to our proposal is not the carbon capture. It is the money transfer. And this rich world will do everything not to transfer. And therefore, that is the point we have to work on. And I think this discussion can help us to even strengthen those points. So I thank you all very, very much. It was very inspiring for me to have you here discussing this with our group. And of course, my thanks goes to everybody here, but natürlich particular to our moderator, because he organized it all. And for you to participate, to our chairperson, who comes from industry and has all the information. And there is a very close link to nature-based solutions. And there is Estelle Herlin. And there is a nature-based solution topic afterwards in this conference. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.